And so we have this battle in every hierarchy between the wise king and the tyrant. And you see that expressed in popular tropes. So most of you have seen The Lion King, for example, which is a remarkable thing in and of itself, that most of you have actually seen that, and worth thinking about, given that it's an animated movie about like lions who can talk, and that's all fine with you. So strangely enough, but Mufasa, who's the wise king, and who's at the top of the hierarchy, perched on top of Pride Rock and master of everything he can survey, has an evil brother. That's Scar. And Scar has obviously been damaged by life, hence Scar. And he's a little bit too intellectual for his own good and not much of a physical specimen. And he's a representative of the arrogance of the rational mind, fundamentally, and its opposition to wisdom. And he's constantly conspiring to take down the king. And that's a very, very old story. It's an unbelievable, it's Cain and Abel. It's that old. It's a story that was reflected in Egyptian mythology far before Christianity emerged. When the Egyptians figured out that every hierarchy that emerges as a consequence of natural human activity is threatened by its evil shadow. And that shadow is partly a consequence of the fact that, like, if you make a business and it works, and then you don't change it at all for 20 years, then it dies, right? Because everything around it changes. So even if you produce something of great value, if you're a heroic entrepreneurial type and you produce something of great value, and then you allow it to become static and stultified and unchanging, then it will deteriorate and die of its own accord because the environment changes. And so things fall apart of their own accord, one of the great mythological messages. And that's sped along by the blindness of men. That's the next great doctrine. And so that's the doctrine of the flood, for example. That the catastrophe is coming, the flood is on its way, always the case in life, but it's going to be a hell of a lot worse if you're blind and not ready. And so those are mythological truths. You have the wise king, always threatened by the evil brother, and who's conspiring through deceit and willful blindness and sheer entropy to demolish the state. And so in Egypt, for example, there was a god associated with each of those conceptualizations. The god Osiris, who was god of the state, a great hero in his youth, the founder of the Egyptian state, but old now and willfully blind, will not pay attention to what he should pay attention to, and archaic, like things that are old are archaic. And that's our culture, right? Our culture is the construction of the dead, the past, the dead. And so it's blind and it's out of date. And then it's threatened by a malevolent force. And the malevolent force is, malevolence itself, the willful blindness of people and the desire to do harm. And so it's reasonable to note that any hierarchical organization can be properly conceptualized in these two ways. There's a wise king element and there's an evil tyrant element. And then the question is, which has the upper hand? Now, what's happened with the radical types is they've just taken the wise king out of the equation altogether and said, what Western culture constitutes is nothing but the evil tyrant. It's like, okay, first of all, no, wrong. It's wrong psychologically. It's like, you're missing a character there. Where's the wise king? You say, there's no evidence for the wise king. It's like, yeah, actually, there's plenty of evidence.